Hello and welcome to the latest Red Robin podcast World Cup special with Jono and Costo. And we are, of course, powered by 360 Chartered Accountants on Budget Ties Auto Centre. In this episode, we'll round up the group stages of the Men's Rugby League World Cup and look ahead to the exciting quarter-final stages. Costo, how are you doing, my friend?
G'day, Jono. G'day to everybody watching the podcast in all four corners of the rugby league universe. Great to be back this week after the little hiccup with ill health last week, and trust you're in good spirits. Nice to hear your voice. Nice to see your face. And can I just start from the get-go, Jono, by sending a big shout-out to the England Physical Disability Rugby League team on winning the World Cup. I think it was a tremendous initiative on the part of John Dutton and the team from Rugby League World Cup. And a big shout-out particularly to young 𝐂𝐜𝐬𝐿𝐴, who had a terrible start to life. I think a lot of people who follow the game closely perhaps know exactly what I'm talking about. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've read in the last week, Jono, was regarding Connor and how he dealt with tragedy and turned it into triumph in so many ways. And well done to the England team. And I know that Johnny Wilkinson was among the well-wishers, and he was in pretty good company as well. So well done to Connor and the England Physical Disability Rugby League team as we focus on what's coming up.
Yeah, and Costo, Rovers have recently launched their PDRL team, which is fantastic. It's another feather in the cap for the club and shows how expansive rugby league is and how inclusive the game is. Connor was actually the first Hull Kingston Rovers player since Phil Lowe in 1972 to lift the World Cup. So it's a fantastic achievement for Connor.
It is.
Yeah,
Jono, just being mentioned in the same sentence as the great Phil Lowe. You know, and for the younger audience out there, if you haven't done the Google, do the Google, because that's just a wonderful thing. Just to stop right what you said there, and just to have Connor's name with Lowe's name. That's just amazing in half a century, and of course, hence the thirst for English rugby league fans, hoping that the drought will break in the big one at the Theatre of Dreams, of course, on November 19. And it's captivating stuff, isn't it, as we get down to the final 8?
Yeah. What has been the reaction down under Costo to the Rugby League World Cup? Is it gathering momentum now that we're getting into the knockout stages? Are people starting to get a bit more interested, or was that interest always there?
Well, I think the multicultural community in, say, for example, Sydney, they have their own teams, of course. Western Sydney has a big Lebanese community. And let's not forget, though, that teams like Lebanon and Italy and so forth, and Greece, of course, Jamaica, let's not forget the Reggae Warriors. They've got their own domestic competitions. They may be small, but green shoots have been appearing for quite some time. So, you know, if you've grown up in an Australian Lebanese community in Western Sydney, no doubt you're on the Cedars. You're on Michael Checker's bandwagon. And I'm not talking about the Pumas at Twickenham. And that's a great thing for international rugby league. And, of course, you know, there are always, Jono, doubting Thomases out there. There are joy killers out there, people trying to poo-poo the event. Some people in the rugby league media saying, look, 16 teams is too much. I disagree. You know, if you go and have a look at the other World Cups for other sports, they've had blowouts, they've had record scores. I think it's something we should be proud of, and seeing what's happened, not only in the men's, but if you look at the women's with the Brazilian girls, the Amazonas, that's a great story. There are so many great stories, Jono. And look, I've got to say, you know, I mean, I great admiration for the BBC, but some of the storytelling, unfortunately, hasn't got out, and that's disappointing because it's just an absolute a kaleidoscope of colour, and it's just an author's dream. All these stories, people have their own story, and it's just disappointing that we haven't heard a lot of these stories about people and where they've come from and who they're representing, their culture and community at this feast of football.
Yeah, we'll come on to the quarter-final stages very soon, Costo. But the group stages, I suppose, went the way that many people expected. Wales, Jamaica, Scotland, Greece, all failing to pick up any points. Cook Islands recording a win, Ireland recording 1 win, Italy a win, and France. And then the teams in first and second, pretty much as were expected, I suppose. Maybe Costo Group C. a little bit of a surprise to see Lebanon pip Ireland to that second place spot. But then when you see the job they did on Jamaica in the final group stage, Lebanon are running hot at the moment.
Well, look, any team, any Lebanese team that's going to have Mitchell Moses and Adam Douahi in the halves, and of course we saw Douahi alternate between fullback and standoff, is going to be a strong side. And of course the Lebanese did suffer a body blow in the middle of the tournament and in the middle of the pool matches with the suspension of Adam Douahi. There's a lot of controversy there, and depending on who you believe, it wasn't a good look for the game. But regardless, Adam's a fantastic player, got silky skills. He's a big unit. He's a big man. He can leap for the ball. He can kick the ball. He's got a great pass on him. He can hurt you too in defence. And I suppose the Irish, once they lost Byrne and Jolliffe up front, they just lacked so much grunt. And of course, needless to say, the coach absolutely livid. I think if he came on the podcast with you and really revealed how furious he was with what transpired, the Irish didn't get much of a rub of the green, no pun intended, in the tournament. And losing those two bookends really did curtail any chance they had of supplanting the Lebanese in that second spot. But it is what it is. And I know that the Irish will kick on, and to Jim Reynolds and his support team from Rugby League Ireland. I've had a bit to do with them. I've called the last two Irish grand finals. They've got a good little domestic competition happening there with not only the men, but also the ladies. And I know that that grand final day at Malahide in County Dublin, it's something I'm looking forward to calling live and in colour on location in the not too distant future.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And we've talked, haven't we, about how the need to grow domestic competition, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. If we want to grow the international game, well, we need to create a bigger pool of players, and we need to stop probably relying on heritage players, etc., etc. So the fact that you referenced the Ireland League, and and I've saw as well, you mentioned on your social media about, I think, was it Poland taking on, was it Slovenia or Slovakia? And the more games we can get played domestically, the better.
You don't want to digress too much, of course, with the focus on the Rugby League World Cup. But for those keen international rugby league followers, just to digress for a few seconds, last weekend in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, they had their first ever international outing, and it was a 72-0 drubbing at the hands of their neighbours in Poland. So the Polska boys put the cleaners through them in the Slovakian capital. But I've had some messages come back and forth from Bratislava in the last week as I keep tabs on what's happening in those four corners of the rugby league universe. And I know that they were chuffed to bits, to use an old English expression, Jono, absolutely chuffed to bits to get on the field, to sing the national anthem. There wasn't a big crowd, but Jono, it's the start of something special. And, there were probably people in Papua New Guinea who were wondering about this game that they introduced years ago called Rugby League. And look at it now, it's the national sport. I'm not saying that's going to happen in Slovakia, but it's a sign of good times for European Rugby League, particularly with the ERL confirming the arrangements for next year's Euro B. I had the privilege and pleasure of calling Euro B last year, involving Serbia, Ukraine, and Russia. In fact, the last team sport involving Russia and Ukraine was, I'm pretty sure, was Rugby League, and yours truly had the honour of calling that game. So Euro B next year with the 6 teams that have been finalised, Ukraine to play their home matches up in Norway. I think it's exciting times across the channel and right across the continent as green shoots appear, including Slovakia getting off the ground last weekend. Well done.
Yeah, one to keep an eye on, definitely. If we bring it back to the Rugby League World Cup, Group A, England recorded 3 wins, 6 points. Samoa, despite receiving a bit of a battering by England in that opening game that we all remember, have recovered to be Samoa, and then France and Greece. They recorded 62 points to 4 victory over France in the last outing. England, of course, putting Greece to the sword, 94 points to 4, setting all kinds of records. Much more akin to a cricket score than a rugby league score. But credit to the Greek side, ran England close for a lot of the game, brought the score to 10-4. And what I will say is I was at that game, Costo, England-Greece, and yes, the scoreline is what it is. But if at the full-time whistle, if you would have looked at the Greece side, you would have not known they'd been on the end of a thumping. They were absolutely delighted to be sharing a pitch with England, to be reveling in the applause of the crowd, to be able to go over the whitewash and score a try. And for me, that is one of the big stories of the Rugby League World Cup, the fact that Greece have been able to put a side out and compete.
Well, players like Mitzias, you know, they have got a following. There's no doubt about that. There's a club in Athens, the Aris Eagles. You know, I wonder how many people, how many nutcases out there, and I say that very, very candidly, who love international rugby league, have been trying to buy or are in the process of procuring an Aris Eagles jersey or some rugby league merchandise from Greece. And it's a great story. You know, Steve Georgalis, when we talk about giving plugs and handing out bouquets, let's give a big shout out to Georgie. Steve Georgalis on the coaching staff at my beloved North Queensland Cowboys, Jono. He's done an incredible job as coach and been involved, you know, for so long, 2 decades of chipping away. And, you know, I mean, I was reading today how, you know, Greece, and I don't want to overlook Malta. And I know Malta's not in the World Cup, hasn't played in a World Cup, but they've been punching way above their weight. But Greece have been traveling here and there. And of course, it's been well documented how the authorities took a dim view to rugby league. The sport was banned up until a few months ago. But Greece, Jono, you know, going back, 10 years ago, you know, they played in places like Vanuatu. You know, I mean, they've helped actually develop the game, not only in their own country, but in other parts of the world. And I've seen Vanuatu play, for example, in the South Pacific. So, you know, the world has so changed in the last decade, and Greece really did, you know, play above themselves. Magoulias, I know he didn't set the world on fire at Warrington. It's well documented, that story. And, you know, and he came back, of course, to be with his partner for the birth of their first child and missed the last game. But, you know, I mean, I commend you and those people that turned out in Sheffield. You know, I remember being at the Don Valley Stadium 25 years ago when I saw the Sheffield Eagles upstage the Perth Reds in the World Club Challenge. And, you know, a lot of memories come flooding back. I know it was at Bramall Lane. The only thing I was disappointed about, Jono, was that they couldn't get a bigger crowd. I thought that was disappointing because this is a very good England side. And you and I both know, and so many of your viewers, this is England's big chance to break the drought.
Yeah, definitely. Samoa, have they turned the corner? A bit of off-field disruption in the last podcast we did. Obviously, you broke the news that your good friend Willie Poachin had been turned away from the training camp. I think Matt Parrish had contacted him by phone and apologised for that. Have they finally got their act together, do you think?
Well, just as a follow-up to that, in fairness to Matt Parrish, and he has been under the pump and he has copped a lot of criticism, and he was very prickly, wasn't he, in his post-match press conference. I'm going to call it as I see it and as I hear it, basically chipping the media, didn't he? He wasn't backward and coming forward, Matt Parrish, but he's among the coaches that's under the most pressure at this World Cup. He's been there for a long time, and they have been underachievers. We all know that COVID has interrupted the flow of the international game in the world that we used to live in and we have lived in, and how things have got back to normal. This event, of course, is 12 months behind schedule. Let's not forget that. I think that the Samoans have turned the corner. They've got so much class and stacked with talent. And it just needs to be directed in the right way, that passion and playing with some smarts. Just on Parrish, he did reach out, as you say, to Willie Poaching, and Poaching did come into the dressing rooms at Doncaster there a couple of weeks ago, whatever it was, and so they've kissed and made up. But look, Samoa should be doing better in international rugby league, and you know, I think that first game was an aberration, and it should be a reminder to the English fans that, you know, beware of the wounded warrior. And they were wounded, Samoa. And, of course, seemingly now on a collision course with their Polynesian brothers, Tonga, who I believe are every chance of going all the way at Old Trafford.
It's going to be very interesting. Group B, Australia took on Italy in their final group game, 60 points to 6 victory for the Australians. James Tedesco, not quite sure which national anthem to sing or whether to sing both of them. And Fiji putting Scotland to the sword, 30 points to 14. A very competitive Scotland side. Kane Lynette's last game for for the Bravehearts. Of course, 𝐂𝐴THM Rovers player. Australia sort of cruising along without pulling up too many trees, aren't they? They seem to be going under the radar a little bit. Very, very methodical in their approach to games.
Well, they got an awesome spine, haven't they? 𝐻𝐿𝐴, world class. And, you know, if you stop the tournament right now and ask to pick the team of the tournament, you know, 𝐻𝐿𝐴, he's just an unbelievable player. And you're right about what he said. And if he had sang both anthems and you want to go and check the evidence, and I say good on him, because he's proud of his heritage. And every player in this tournament, I'm sure, every man and woman who's participating in all three are very proud of their heritage and where they've come from, as we showcase the international game and the culture from different corners of the world. But, you know, that Australian side, you know, look at Harry Grant and, you know, the halves. Look, the big debate, of course, when you asked me at the top of the podcast today, Jono, where the debate is in the Australian rugby league media, it's all over the battle over the playmaker role between Daly Cherry Evans and Nathan Cleary. It's just going on like a soap opera. You know, it's not quite Home and Away and Neighbours, but it is like a soap opera. It's a never-ending story. And what Meninga is doing with that team is coming under increasing scrutiny. The Australian forwards, Jono, I'll say it now, no disrespect to the likes of Pat Carrigan and Lindsay Collins and others that have put their hand up in this tournament. That Australian forward pack doesn't, you know, put the wind up people like it did in the glory days of Shane Webke and Mark Carroll and Chief Harrigan and Petro Civoniceva and players of that calibre. And not to wax lyrical too much, but, you know, the challenge for the Australian forwards is to live up to that mantra and the history of the jersey. Of course, we're expected to win and win well, but that was the case, Jono, back in 2008, and I called that World Cup, and we all know what happened. The Kangaroos didn't lift the trophy, did they? And you go and ask Coach Ricky Stewart at the time, does he have any regrets? I'm sure he has some regrets, because it was a missed opportunity. So this is about grabbing all the opportunity in front of you with both hands and seizing the moment, because that's what happened in that final 14 years ago in Brisbane. But you've got to get there. That's the big thing, Jono. And I'm not convinced that Australia will get there. I just want to say to your viewers and to you today, I'm not convinced that Australia will actually get there, because the return of Jahrome Hughes was sublime. And I think New Zealand have got the best forwards in the competition. And so if Warera Hargraves, you know, regardless of what happens there, you know, they've got depth. They've got depth to cover, and I think New Zealand are a big show.
Yeah, and of course, New Zealand putting Ireland to the sword in Group C, 48 points to 10. It wasn't all New Zealand. New Zealand didn't get it all their own way, though, did they, Costo? With Ireland putting up a very resilient performance.
They did, and Jono, let's be fair to the Irish, to the Wolfhounds. Can you imagine? And Liam Byrne, like, what you mean? You can't cry about it now. It's all over. It's all academic, isn't it? And you know, should they have played more games, lead-up games to this tournament? Well, of course, the answer is yes. And getting preparation, you know, with the resource allocation. You know, I mean, not every nation's flush with the cash to play here and there, and it's not easy. And of course, we've got the reality of the professional clubs. Will they release players? When will they release them? Under what circumstances? We've all heard the stories. It's not a new concept, that. So I think with Byrne and Jolliffe up front, they're a better team, and the game's closer. But I thought that the Irish did the best they could. Keary couldn't do it all on his own, and New Zealand just so much class in that team. And, you know, like Peter Hiku, for example, he's gone up to the Cowboys there, and he just seems to have kicked on it. And DWZ, he was in another world the other morning, Australian time, when I was watching that. I've watched every game in the tournament, men's and women's, well, certainly with the men, multiple times, as well as seeing it live. I've seen the four women's games so far, and, you know, I'm just living off it, obviously. But that New Zealand side is just stacked with talent. And, you know, I think that if they can get, well, as I said, I don't want to count their chickens before they hatch, but they're on a collision course with the Kangaroos, and I believe they can beat them.
Yeah. Is there any weakness in that side, Costo?
In the New Zealand side, well, I think discipline is so key. You know, you can't belt blokes like you used to. Let's not sugarcoat it, Jono. You can't go out there and just drive with the shoulder and take people's heads off. And that was an era that I grew up with as a broadcaster. And the game has been cleaned up. I said to somebody today, Jono, rugby league has never been safer. And that's why we've seen more and more girls and women take up the sport. And that's a good thing. And it's a great thing for rugby league. And it's something that we should be proud of. And, you know, our laws of the game and how they're enforced. And, you know, on the part, you know, the referees and touch judges, match officials, of course they're getting some things wrong with video refereeing. Just ask the Papua New Guinea Colonels. Not happy. Privately, they are still filthy with what happened with Ty in that first up game. But it is what it is. And in answer to your question, Jono, if New Zealand can keep players on the field, you can't afford, if you're going to have players sin bin, guess what? You're going to get hurt by the good teams. And we're at the stage of the tournament where every team should be seen as a good team.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I mean, prior to the Rugby League World Cup and Super League, there was tremendous debate about players being suspended and the consistency of the referees, etc., etc. In the Rugby League World Cup, we haven't seen too many players suspended or put on report or dealt with. Do you think referees are being a bit lenient, or do you think we're seeing top level rugby where players probably take more care for the opposition and the techniques are better, and that's why we're not seeing as many players either sin-binned or then serving bans after games?
Oh, look, there's been a number of incidents where, you know, you think, hang on, how come that person hasn't been sin-binned, and you know, and then the match reviewers, and go and ask the Irish. Go and ask the. This is a great question. Go and get Jed on the program and see what he had, and you know, assistant coach Kelly and the gang. See what they've got to say, because, you know, he had a lot to say, didn't he, the other night? And I was talking to him privately, and, you know, it's not for me to say what he said, some of the stuff in confidence to me, but not happy at all. And it would have been a bad look to see a coach suspended for speaking out, for bringing the game into disrepute or anything like that. I'm not saying that he did do that, but, you know, if he got any further, he would have had to run the risk of that happening. And you know, look, it's a tough job refereeing, and you know, I mean, I grew up watching Barry 𝐵𝐺𝐼𝐸, legendary international referee, the Grasshopper, as he was called. He actually helped get me my first ever job as a reporter, as a police reporter, court reporter, with News Corp from Barry 𝐵𝐺𝐼𝐸. So, you know, I was his ball boy every Sunday, if you like, as a kid growing up. And so I've got enormous respect for the whistleblowers, you know, and the likes of Sharp and Badger. You know, they've done some trailblazing work, haven't they, as ladies, you know, breaking the mantra or that it's a boys' game. Not at all. It's you said at the top of the telecast of the podcast, you know, the inclusiveness of the game. It goes to referees. It goes in a lot of areas, and that's a great thing for the game. But in answer to your question, look, you could probably roll tape on different examples of high tackles, and we could debate that. But look, it is what it is. And don't forget, Jono, the organisers want the best possible players on the field every week, don't they?
Yeah. Box office. Absolute box office. And of course, someone who was box office against New Zealand was Hull Kingston Rovers' new recruit, Louis Senior, who scored 2 tries. He actually joined Josh Addo-Carr at the top of the try-scoring charts. Of course, he was overtaken by Dom Young on Saturday after his try-scoring exploits against Greece. But Senior definitely shown it well with 6 tries in 3 games for the Wolfhounds. If we go to Group D, Costo, Tonga 92 points to 10 victors over the Cook Islands. Just wow, just relentless, wasn't it, from Tonga? Really hitting form at the right time.
Well, if you said to me, Jono, the best team performance so far, in the men has been the game you just touched on. I'm not going to disagree with you. I thought Tonga was white hot. They absolutely massacred the Cookies. And I felt for my former colleague at Sky Television in New Zealand, Tony Iro. His nephew, 𝐂𝐜𝐜𝐿, did the best he could at the back. I saw his performance in the mid-season test match. I saw the Cookies play there in that match against Samoa. Don't forget the game against Samoa where they got flogged in Sydney. David Nofaluma scored not one, not two, not three, not three. He got 4 tries, Nofaluma. He didn't even get picked for this tournament in the Samoan side. So coming back to backtrack just quickly, that's how much some of these teams are stacked, particularly the Polynesian boys. And, I just thought the Tongan performance. Look, I first met him, Jono, when he was 17 years of age. I spent a few hours with him at that tender age. We met in Rotorua. I was calling Four Nations Rugby League, if memory serves me right, in the central North Island of New Zealand. And we caught the plane back together, back to Brisbane, sitting side by side. And his name was Jason Tamalolo. And in fact, I remember we went into the Qantas Club after the flight. We were both going to our respective flights, and they had to kick him out of the lounge because I didn't realise he wasn't 18, but he felt like he was over 18 because he was big. He was quietly spoken, but we had a good conversation. He is just a colossal figure in that Tongan Rugby League camp. And the big bad wolf is obviously absolutely tickled pink to have him back on deck because in Jason, they trust. And his return should sound an ominous warning to all comers in this tournament that Tonga, as I said earlier, in my opinion, for what it's worth, Jono, I think they can go all the way.
Yeah, they're looking very good, aren't they? And obviously they come up against Samoa in the quarterfinals. Before we move on to the PNG Wales game, I think there was plenty of empty seats up in Middlesbrough for that Tonga 𝐂𝐜𝐿's game, but the fact that they got a crowd close to 9,000 in a non-traditional heartland place for rugby league, and I think people were treated to a spectacle, and I think there should be great credit to the people who did turn out for that game to watch that, because I know there was fears prior to it that the crowd wouldn't top 3,000 or 4,000, and to get up double that was fantastic. And I think we need to stop detracting from the empty seats and actually concentrate on the people who are back in rugby league, who are back in the Rugby League World Cup, who are supporting these nations, who are going along as a neutral and really buying into the spirit. And of course, the Tongan fans who travelled up to Middlesbrough, making a great spectacle of the game. So not just a spectacle on the pitch, Costo, spectacle in the stands as well.
For sure, and it's those pictures have been captivating. I did lament on the storytelling, and it was a generalisation. I just want to qualify my remarks earlier. And when we have these blowouts or big scorelines, that's an opportunity for people to be educated. As a broadcaster, you want to obviously entertain people. We're in the entertainment business, and rugby league is in the entertainment business, and. But relaying those stories to people on their devices or in their lounge rooms or wherever they're watching in all 4 corners of the world. And I think I've been talking to people remotely online, so to speak, I think just about on every continent so far in the pool games. And there are people watching. And I have heard anecdotally that if England go all the way and get to Old Trafford, there'll be something like 10 million people in the UK alone watching on the Beeb. So here's hoping. So it's not always about the crowds. Look, I've got to say, playing at the Riverside, I've not been there, but, what you're saying, I'm not disputing that. But, the games, for example, at Kingston Park, I just thought that was appalling. I don't want to dwell on the negatives, but, the stories about the Italians and having those infections and whatnot, you draw your own conclusions. And I saw the beautiful surface at York overnight, obviously, with the women's game. And I thought, well, why wouldn't we have used that surface and that venue? But, look, we've known the schedule for a long time. It's not a secret. But when you see the games on television, so with empty seats, or what is this synthetic pitch all about? I have called a game with the synthetic pitch. I found it unusual. In fact, it was a test match between the Philippines and Chile earlier this year, and it was my first experience. And I thought, how on earth can you play on this stuff? but they did. And they weren't alone because we had some curtain raisers as well. But anyway, I know that the Italians weren't happy, and we've had talk about the English grounds, the physical nature of them, of course, with the advertising hoardings and club officials. I've got to say, Jono, they would be nervous, and they'll be nervous going through to the final, not getting any injured players coming back from the tournament. So, look. Yeah. I love English rugby league. I love the rain. I love the wind. I love the cold. But above everything, Jono, I love the people. And I just encourage people. Tell your mates. Tell your colleagues. Tell people you don't really get on with at work. Tell them to come and support the Rugby League World Cup and go back to what you just said. Come and check out the showcase of culture and colour and the passion and the pride, because you can't buy that stuff at Tesco's.
Yeah, and we saw plenty of colour and heritage and celebration in the final game in Group D, the final game, group stage game, Papua New Guinea versus Wales. I was actually at that fixture. It was wet and wild. It was, I came home wetter than an otter's pocket. It was definitely a game played in difficult conditions, but PNG going about their business very professionally, 36-0. Wales, great effort from them. There's some very proud players in that Welsh side, but ultimately not able to cope with the attacking threat of Papua New Guinea.
No, and the threat coming from players that we hadn't seen too much of or heard a lot about, players like Roderick Tai, and what an excitement machine he was. And, when he opened up the game with that piece of individual brilliance, that was like a dagger to the heart for the battling Welsh, wasn't it? But, to Ollie Oles and, Captain Keir, the Bradford firefighter, he was putting out plenty of spot fires during the whole tournament, wasn't he? So I know that the men and women of the Bradford Fire Brigade, Jono, they were watching their colleague, weren't they? And that's what this World Cup's all about, how you connect with people and touch people. And, I'm sure those people he worked with are very proud English supporters, but they wanted their colleague to do well. And I sent him a message during the week and said, mate, chin up, you did great. So much guts and not much glory, obviously, but, Evans on the wing, what a great story that is, and how his journey has been in rugby league. And it's a beautiful story in his case. And, I don't want to, shoot the Welsh down, but they were so courageous in the whole tournament. But, Jono, I got to call it as I see it. I can't see Wales. Well, they're no guarantee to play in France in 3 years' time. And when I called the World Cup in 2008, they didn't participate because they weren't good enough. That's the reality. And if you haven't got a flagship team, and I'm talking about top flight Super League here, and I know they've been there before, but the problem with rugby league is, Jono, without digressing, we don't pick and stick. And all of a sudden we pull the cord on teams. Don't get me wrong. The Australian authorities have been in this space before. You only have to look at teams like the Perth Reds. I touched on them before when I saw them famously suffer that shock loss to Sheffield at the Don Valley Stadium, Adelaide Rams. But the British game, I don't want to go on to a sob story and digress to the point, we're talking about the Toronto Wolfpack and PSG and whatnot, but you've got to pick and stick. And if you want to grow the game, you either want to be a little sport or a big sport. You want to be a big sport on the M62 corridor, or do you want to be a player nationally and attract national audiences? The TV rights are coming up in the Super League, as you know. Well, if you want to drive the price up to help the amateur clubs that I touched on a couple of weeks ago, I think I did, you need to have a big competition. You need to think big. And Wales is crying out for a Super League team, I believe. So too the Scottish and the Irish. And it's in my Holy Gospel published by League Express going back, 6 months ago, and I stand by that.
Yeah, and we're going to catch up about that, Costo, probably in the build-up to Super League next season, or next year, hopefully. But we're at the business end of the competition now. These are the games that really grab people's attention. The quarter-final stages, the winners go through to the semi-finals. The losers, of course, go home. First up, I know we've already touched on it briefly, Australia-Lebanon, Friday night at Huddersfield. It's sure to be a competitive game, but you can't really look any further than an Australia victory, can we?
Well, of course, it's a matter of how much will Australia win by. Lebanon, let's give some credit to some of their not so well-known players. You know, 𝐂𝐜𝐜 at the back, he won the Steve Mortimer Award as the Rookie of the Year at Canterbury Bankstown this season, just gone at Belmore at the fullback position for Lebanon. He's an unbelievable player, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to see a lot more and hear a lot more about him with the Bulldogs in the years to come. And, of course, they've got a great Lebanese connection going back to the iconic figure that was 𝐂𝐿 𝐴𝐿 and I call a lot of his football. And you know, if he can be half as good as 𝐴𝐿, well, he'll have done the job. So, you know, I mean, they've got some potency, Lebanon, you know, with Douahi, obviously, and Moses in the halves, but they've got a tradesman-like forward pack. Can they hold the might of the Kangaroos? Well, and if so, how long before the points start leaking and the floodgates open? I think the Kangaroos, just summing up, will have way too much strike power out wide. And, you know, don't forget the big focus for the Australian audience is Cleary versus DCE, DCE versus Cleary. Meninga's playing ducks and drakes as to how much time they're going to get, no matter what jersey they're wearing. Whether they're both in the final 17 remains to be seen. Personally, do I think they'll be both in the 17? Yeah, I do. I expect them to be both there for the game and to participate. I think Australia will win. I think they'll win by 50.
Yeah, and interestingly, Lebanon, one of only 2 Northern Hemisphere sides to reach the last 8. I wonder if many people would have predicted that at the start of the tournament, but of course, they have got some really good players. I suppose the story is about them lesser-known players. The fact that they've got the chance to face Australia in a World Cup quarter-final, you know, these are stories that they'll live on for the rest of their lives, aren't they? You know, this might be as good as it gets for them.
Well, that's right, you know, and you know, the rugby league nutter that I am, I watched a bit of the Lebanese domestic grand final between the Grey Wolves and the Wolves in the last few months. So, you know, I mean, I do sleep, Jono, at night time. You might think I'm a bit like a possum, up at night time and sleeping during the day. But if you want to watch what's happening in the Middle East or in Africa or the Americas or Europe, you need to do a bit of that. And I just think it's been a great story for the Lebanese. I did get to see them play against Malta at Canterbury Bankstown's home ground, their spiritual home at Belmore, in the middle of the season. And, you know, it's, as I say, the big challenge for the Lebanese forwards. It's a difficult week for Checker, of course, juggling his responsibilities, you know. But if he was there full-time this week with the Cedars, I don't think it'll make much difference anyway. There's no substitute for class, and Australia is stacked. Yeah.
And then 2 games on Saturday. England versus Papua New Guinea. Of course, Papua New Guinea. Hull Kingston Rovers, special links with them through Stanley Jean, John O'Cole, Michaela Yazoo. Of course, Neville, relation to you. And then the second game is New Zealand versus Fiji. That is coming from the MKM Stadium in Hull. But England, Papua New Guinea, it's going to be a very big test for the English. But you imagine that they've got enough to see off the Papua New Guineans.
Well, let's just talk about the 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐿's game. They do pose some sort of a threat to England. Now, not many people want to hear that on this podcast, particularly in your part of the world. But it needs to be said, Jono, and Papua New Guinea didn't get a lot of luck in that first game. Just imagine if they get a bit of luck in this quarterfinal against England. All the pressure's on England. There's no pressure on the 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐿s. Yeah, there's probably going to be, millions of people watching, which is nothing unusual in Papua New Guinea, in Madang and Goroka, Port Moresby, Rabaul, Wewak, all over the place. But they will put their best foot forward. And, you know, they don't have the strike power of Xavier Coates, but they've dealt with that. And, you know, Ty is an excellent finisher, isn't he? And, you know, they did some resting of players in their last match. And, you know, I'm a big fan of 𝐁𝐿𝐴𝐿 and he's got plenty of bulk about him and he can bend the line. And they're going to need to do that, aren't they? So all the pressure's on England. And, you know, look, I've got great respect for players like Wellesby, Dominic Young, of course. Everyone's in love with Dominic Young. Find me someone who loves rugby league who's not in love with Dominic Young. You know, if you've got a business on that M62 corridor, sign him up commercially because he's a great get. He was a great get before the tournament. The only difference is, Jono, the price has gone up. I think this will be an interesting game. I think it'll be the most absorbing of the quarterfinals. And Papua New Guinea, they just got to watch themselves giving away those penalties. So discipline will be key. Stanley Tepend, I'm sure, will be reminding his players in the lead up to this match. The message will be backed up by the likes of Shane Flanagan, who's on the coaching staff with the 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐿s. I think England will win, but I think it'll be a lot closer than what people think. And if England only win by a couple of tries, 2 or 3 tries, that would not surprise me. I'm going to say England by 18 points.
Yeah, and Shaun Wane has admitted he's got some tough decisions to make, but he's not afraid to make them. He rested a number of key players against France, did the same against Greece. Maybe the biggest headache he's got is, though, whether Ryan Hall retains his place or whether Tommy Makinson comes back into the side, because Ryan Hall has fitted into that side seamless. He's a great for the England side. Fantastic career. And maybe, just maybe, his experience in the big games could be the thing that tips him over Makinson.
Well, there's question marks in that scenario, obviously. Sneed played very well the other day. There's more to rugby league than kicking goals. This is not rugby union. You don't get 3 points for a penalty goal in rugby league. And we don't get penalties for things that we don't understand in our game either. So, Sneed's defence is obviously a concern. Again, I'll talk about stuff that people don't want to talk about. He's got some silky skills with the ball. He can put people in holes. He can kick goals. His kicking game, general play is pretty good from what I've seen as well. But so some headaches there for Shaun Wane. He's probably gone into his local pharmacy and got some Panadol. But that's a good position to be in, Jono. That is a really good position to be in for England. But as I say, I think it'll be, if the game's close as we come up to the 1 hour mark, just write that down, the 60th minute. Where are these two teams? And if England's only leading by a try, that would not surprise. And I think England will win, as I said, I'll say 18 points in this, but I think the 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐿s will give them a bit of a fright.
Yeah, second game on Saturday, New Zealand versus Fiji, coming live from the great city of Hull. Costo, New Zealand, you've waxed lyrical about them, about their strengths. Fiji, though, are no mugs, are they? There'll be no pushovers. But again, another game where you imagine it'd be not a comprehensive victory for New Zealand, but definitely a clear victory for them.
Well, it's the bottom line is that New Zealand's stacked with NRL stars and Fiji's not, and 𝐂𝐴𝐿𝐿𝐿 and Viliami Kikau and Api Coruscant, they can't do it themselves. They're going to need some help. And I thought the Fiji were not that impressive against Scotland. And they won't like hearing that. My brothers over there, I'll be probably getting a few messages from Don Natumbi and so, but it is what it is. And they've got a big job here. And don't forget, Jono, New Zealand is looking to extract revenge for what happened back in 2017. And there's already been a number of players that have touched on that in the lead up to this quarterfinal clash that go back to 2017. And they are, I don't want to say scarred, but, they lament a missed opportunity there. And it was a shock scoreline. I couldn't believe it at the time. I don't think we're going to see a repeat of that. And I think New Zealand will steamroll Fiji in your part of the world. And I suspect New Zealand will win by 40 points.
Yeah, and the final game of the quarterfinals taking place on Sunday at Warrington. I feel like I don't need to wind you up for you to keep talking about this one, because it's the one that all neutrals are probably looking forward to most. It's the hit up between Samoa and Tonga. Costo, tell us about this game and what we should look forward to.
Well, I think the collisions will be absolutely sickening. I hope I hope that the Rugby League World Cup officials, if I could give a suggestion to John Dutton and co, get some tow trucks to the ground, because there's going to be some serious carnage here, and make sure that the paramedics are stocked up, because they will leave nothing in the tank as these Polynesian brothers go to war. I'm not going to talk it up any less than that. They will just go for it from the get-go to the very end of the match. I had the privilege, Jono, of calling the first test match for Samoa against the Kiwis many years ago, and they've come a long way since then, and so too the Tongans, of course. You mean I can go back to the World Cup 22 years ago when Murray Hurst was coach of Tonga, and the Tongan team included a bloke called Willie Mason, and they've had a great journey. The Samoans have had a great journey, but they've got an asterisk beside their name that they've underachieved. I just think with 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐼 coming back, that just changes the dynamic. He didn't just come back from suspension. He came back with a bang. And the big bad wolf is right. He is the best forward in the game. To me, he's definitely, if you said pick the best 3 or 5 players in the game, I think if you suggested that 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐼 is not in that company, I'd suggest with respect you'd go off to your local hospital and get your head read. He's an unbelievable player. The respect that he's got in that team, the players around him just lift. I think Katoa at standoff has been a great discovery for Tonga. Tessie New was scintillating at fullback. I've been giving out my 3-2-1s on my Twitter feed at Costo Jason. That's Costo Jason on Twitter after each match. And they just had stars right around the park. The fact they didn't get 100 probably surprised me, actually. And I think that Tonga will beat Samoa. I think there's a lot of pressure on people like Milford and question marks about the halves for Samoa. I think Tonga have got them covered 1-13 and a pretty strong bench as well.
So, Costo,
So I reckon Tonga by 4.
Wow. That is going to keep people up on a Sunday night if that's going to be as close as that, and I'm looking forward to it, Costo, because I think it is going to be a battle, and I think there'll be a bit of guile in there. I think ultimately, as strong as you are in the middle, and I do think it'll come down to who's got that bit of craft, who's got that little bit of guile to just push them and nudge them over the line, and I agree with you, Costo. I think Tonga are the ones who will reign supreme in the end.
Well, the kicking game is so important, and being awake to the English conditions, this was a question mark about the Pacifica teams. What's their kicking game like? Can they pull it up, and can they pull it up in the end goal? Can they get repeat sets and turn pressure into points? Build pressure. Don't try and score off every play. And I think young Katoa, he's 18 years of age, and I reckon, Jono, if you just stop the tape right now, and I don't want you to do that for obvious reasons, but if you stop the tape and you go forward to the 2029 World Cup, the 2033 World Cup, I reckon they'll be talking about him at the 2033 World Cup. And God willing, you and I will be here to wax lyrical about the night or the day that we spoke about young Katoa in the halves, when there was a question mark about Tonga and Samoa and their halves and their ability to deliver on the firepower, because they've got unbelievable firepower. The arsenal in that front 6 and the bench is just breathtaking for both teams. But where the interesting thing is the brains of the team, the intellect, who's steering the team around the park, who can create, who can ball play. And 𝐂𝐿𝐿𝐼 can ball play. He can be a wrecking ball. He can be many things. But again, you can't do it on your own. And I just think Katoa at standoff, supported by Lola here, I think they got him covered.
Yeah, well, it's bonfire night over here on Saturday, Costo, but I think there might be more fireworks on the Sunday over in Warrington. It's looking like it's going to be a cracker. Before we wrap up, Costo, of course, the Women's World Cup kicked off earlier in the week. England defeating Brazil 72 points to 4. Papua New Guinea defeating Canada Ravens 34 points to 12. New Zealand putting 46 points past France. And then Australia putting 74 points past the Cook Island. Plenty of rugby league still to be played and plenty to look forward to, Costo.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the Kiwi Ferns in their performance, and playmaker McGregor, unbelievable. What a player she is, and she got plenty of good support cast around her. And Bremner at the back, the mother of 2 for the Jillaroos, for the Aussies. Terrific performance, 4 tries, her support play, her positional play, fabulous. And of course, she missed the World Cup final going back in 2017. So, she's not short on motivation. And so, it's an absorbing competition, the women's as well. And again, it just shows how the game has evolved, doesn't it? And And also, we send our well wishes to the boys and girls, for that matter, the men and ladies taking part in the wheelchair tournament. And I know that the Welsh have got a tough first up assignment. I called them last year, and to Jonesy and the boys, good luck. A big shout out to the Welsh team and heading into that wheelchair event.
Yeah, definitely. Costo, that's it. We'll be back next week with a review of the quarterfinals and a preview of the Men's World Cup semi-finals. It's an end of another fantastic Red Robin Podcast World Cup special with Jono and Costo, which was powered by Budget Tyres Auto Centre and 360 Chartered Accountants. England are just 3 games away from becoming Rugby League World Cup champions. Let's go, boys!